resting during your lifetime. You were a busy man.
Well, it was a busy era. Things were different back then, and I arrived on the scene just a few days before Thanksgiving. I guess you could say I was my family's Thanksgiving turkey.
Well, I'm sure your parents were thankful for a healthy baby boy back in 1896. Were you from a prominent family?
Well, my grandfathers were certainly very well known. My father's father was James Middleton Wesson. Now, he was a Methodist circuit riding preacher after he immigrated from England. My mother's father was Henry Schumacher. He was a German immigrant, and he started the Schumacher Oil Works here in Navasota. They manufactured cottonseed oil. Now, my Schumacher grandparents were very active in the Presbyterian Church.
That is interesting. It sounds like your dad's family was devout Methodist and your mom's family was steadfast Presbyterian.
Yes, well, it was a close-knit community in those days, and that included the English Methodist Wessons and the German Presbyterian Schumachers. Now, their children, my parents, Ada Schumacher and Walter Blake Wesson, were married on New Year's Day in 1896, the year I was born. Now, they both remained in their own family's churches throughout their entire married life. So I guess you could say I was raised in two denominations. Besides seeing to it that I had a strong spiritual background, my parents also made sure I had a good education so I was equipped for whatever life might throw at me.
It sounds like you grew up in a very happy home, but where did you get your love for music?
I guess it was going to all those church services. I did take organ lessons here in Navasota, and I suppose did have some sort of a natural ability, and playing the organ was certainly a way to earn a living if you were good at it. So I decided after serving in the Navy to go to New York to study. That's where I met this beauty.
I understand you were also an accomplished organist. Were you also from Navasota?
Oh, heavens no. I was from Pueblo, Colorado. I had to go all the way to New York City to find this guy. We were both students of the organ, and I saw Henry, and it was love at first sight. My name was Ida Cohen, but it changed pretty quickly after I met him.
Well, we were married in the Big Apple on October the 12th, 1920. Now, I never told her that I'd been married before.
What?
In 1904, I was the groom at the tender young age of 8 in the Park Association's Tom Thumb wedding at the old Columbia Opera House here in Navasota.
Well, you never forget our anniversary, so I'm not going to hold that against you. But we were married about, 9 months when we had our first child. It was a little girl named Emma, and she was a beauty. It was probably a couple of years after that we had our second child, and her name, she was a girl also. Her name was Ida, and Henry insisted that we name her after me.
Of course.
Yes, we were in Columbia, South Carolina at that time.
It sounds like you moved around quite a bit. Is that true?
Well, yes, we did in those early years, but we were musicians. We had to go where the work was. But Henry was so popular. He was in demand all over the United States.
Well, after serving as an organist in South Carolina, I took a position as director of the School of Organ at the Ward Belmont School in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, in 1928, the school installed a carillon of 23 bells in the old tower that they called the Singing Tower. Yes, it was the first carillon in Tennessee and one of only about 25 in North America at the time. The bells were imported from England, and the heaviest one weighed in at 1,344 pounds.
Oh.
Now, in 1929, we dedicated those bells during homecoming week, and I was the first carillionaire at their school.
It must have been shortly after the dedication that you headed to Europe to study the carillon. Was it hard to tear yourself away from the Belmont School?
Oh, no. The music of the bells was so beautiful, and the playing of them was so fascinating to me that I knew I had to go to Europe to study. There were only about 60 carillonneurs in the United States at the time, and I was eager to carve out my niche in that esteemed group.
Right. We loaded up our girls and we moved to Europe. And it was glorious. I think we were there for about 3 years, 1930 through 1932. I was so proud of my Henry. He was the first American to graduate from the School of Caroline Arts in Mechelen, Belgium.
Well, besides becoming an expert on the carillon, I was also able to study composition in Brussels and organ in Paris. It was an extraordinary opportunity for me. And remember London?
London, oh London, I love London. Yes, right before we left to go home, we were invited to give a command performance for the Duke of Kent. He was the youngest brother of King George V.
Wow.
Wow.
What was it that prompted you to head back to the United States?
Well, my studies were at an end and it was time to go to work. Because of my connections in Belgium, I was hired to play the bells at the Chicago World's Fair in 1933 and 34. I also supervised the installation of those bells. Now that tower required extra steel reinforcement because of the weight and vibration of the bells.
It seems like it must have been very difficult to play the carillon.
To be honest with you, it is. Now, the carillon is arranged on the same principles as the keyboard and pedals of an organ, but it's much more intense. One row of keys corresponds to what most people would call the black keys, the other to what most people would call the white keys. Now, the pedals are used to play the larger bells because it requires so much more force to bring out their tone. Their clappers are heavier and it requires a great deal of effort to move them.
So do you play a carillon like you would an organ?
No, not in the least. No. The keys are struck with the closed hand and the little finger is protected with a leather covering to prevent injury when played. Now, the key has to move the entire weight of the clapper, which in larger bells is quite considerable. The carillon playing requires a great deal of physical strength, along with great swiftness and skill. Actually, most of the notes are played on the smaller bells, with just the occasional one played on the larger ones.
It sounds very difficult. Now I see that you're dressed in the traditional garb of a carillonneur with the wide brim hat and the flowing tie. Do you perform in that outfit?
Oh, heavens, no. This is the customary Belgian costume of the carillonneur's profession. For a concert, one would usually wear a tennis outfit or maybe a bathing suit along with some heavy boots or shoes. I have on something underneath this if you'd like for me to strip down and show you.
Henry!
That won't be necessary, sir.
Well, the player climbs the tower, which is usually about 200 feet tall, to the cabin that contains the keyboard. The smaller bells are above the player and the larger ones are below. Now the bells don't move like chimes. The player strikes the keys with a closed fist, coming down with great strength and releasing quickly to produce a clear tone.
My goodness, it sounds like quite the workout. Well, I'm just worn out thinking about it.
Yes, carillon playing is very physically demanding, and because of that, a concert rarely lasts over an hour.
Yes, I'll have to tell you, Henry's musical abilities were unsurpassed, but his technical expertise was just as easily matched. Now, there weren't a whole lot of people in the United States that could even play the carillon, much less see the installation of one.
Were there many jobs like that available, enough for you to make a living?
Not as many as I would have liked, but I was able to stay busy here in Navasota, teaching organ, playing the organ. Ida and I both taught piano and organ. And in 1937, I was able to supervise the installation of a carillon of old and rare bells at Alfred University in New York.
1937, I remember it well. We won the first place cup at the Music Study Club in Center, Texas. Now, I can remember it like it was yesterday. The headline said, Mr. and Mrs. Henry Wesson gave the most delightful performance, including their 2 daughters. And the kids were so excited to be included in that.
I was so proud of them.
I was too.
It sounds like the Wesson family had a wonderful life in Navasota and around the world.
We did.
We did.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us tonight. May the two of you enjoy your well-earned rest together.
Thank you.
Thank you.